Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Today I'm going to be reading several of the short recollections, reminiscences about Lumpur Dune from Gifts He Left Behind, translated by Ajaan Jeff. Lumpur Dune was a disciple of Lumpur Mun. In 1979, Longpu went to Chantaburi to rest and to visit with Ajaan Somchai. On that occasion, a senior monk from Bangkok, Phra Waddleon Khan of Wat Buparang, the ecclesiastical head of the southern region of the country, was also there practicing meditation in his old age, being only 1 year younger than Longpu. When he learned that Longpu was a meditation monk, he became interested and engaged Longpu in a long conversation on the results of meditation. He mentioned his responsibilities, saying that he had wasted a lot of his life engaged in study and administration work well into his old age. He discussed different points of meditation practice with Longpu, finally asking him, "Do you still have any anger?" Longpu immediately answered, "I do, but I don't pick it up." I think one thing that also might be worth mentioning is Lumpur Dune was widely seen as somebody who had finished his work. When Longpu was undergoing treatment at Chulalongkorn Hospital in Bangkok, large numbers of people came to pay their respects and listen to his Dhamma. Mr. Bangrung Sa Hong Seok was among those who were interested in the practice of meditation. He was a student of Ajaan Sanawang of Wat Sangadana in Nonthaburi province, one of the strict meditation centers of our day and time. He broached the topic of the practice of the Dhamma by asking, "Longpu, how does one cut off anger?" Longpu answered, "There's nobody who cuts it off. There's only being aware of it in time. When you're aware of it in time, it disappears on its own." Longtan Nain ordained well after middle age. Illiterate and unable to speak a word of Central Thai, he had his strong point in that he was well-intentioned, tractable, and diligent in his duties, to the point where you couldn't fault him. When he saw other monks taking their leave to go wandering or to study with other Ajahns, he decided that he wanted to go too. So he came to ask permission to leave, which Longpu granted. But then he felt worried. "I can't read. I don't know their language. How will I be able to practice with them?" Longpu advised him, "The practice isn't a matter of the letters of the alphabet or of spoken words. The fact that you know you don't know is a good place to start. The way to practice is this. In the area of the Vinaya, watch their example, the example set by the Ajahn. Don't deviate in any way from what he does. In the area of the Dhamma, keep watch right at your own mind. Practice right at the mind. When you understand your own mind, that, in and of itself, will make you understand everything else." One of the problems in administering the Sangha, in addition to having to deal with all the other major and minor issues that come up, is the lack of monks who will be abbots. We sometimes hear news of monks competing to become abbot of a monastery, but Longpu's students had to be cajoled or forced into taking on the abbotship in other monasteries. Every year, without exception, groups of lay people would come to Longpu, asking him to send one of his students to become the abbot at their monastery. If Longpu saw that a particular monk should go, he would plead with him to go, but for the most part, the monk wouldn't want to go. The usual excuse was, "I don't know how to do construction work. I don't know how to train other monks. I don't know how to give sermons. I'm no good at public relations or receiving guests. That's why I don't want to go." Longpu would respond, "Those things aren't really necessary. Your only responsibility is to follow your daily duties, going for alms, eating your meal, sitting in meditation, doing walking meditation, cleaning the monastery grounds, being strict in observing the Vinaya. That's enough right there. As for construction work, that depends on the lay supporters. Whether or not they do it is up to them." People practicing the Dhamma at present are of two sorts. The first are those who, when they learn the principles of the practice or receive advice from a teacher and get on the path, are intent on trying to follow that path to the utmost of their ability. The other sort are those who, even though they've received good advice from their teacher and have learned the correct principles of the practice, are not sincerely intent. Their efforts are lax. At the same time, they like to go out looking for other teachers at other centers. Wherever they hear there's a good center, there they go. Meditators of this sort are many. Longpu once advised his students, "When you go to a lot of centers and study with a lot of teachers, your practice won't get results. For when you go to a lot of centers, it's as if you go back to the beginning over and over again. You don't gain any sure principles in your practice. Sometimes you get uncertain and bewildered. Your mind isn't solid. Your practice degenerates and doesn't progress." Students and practitioners of the Dhamma are of two sorts. The first sort are those who genuinely study and practice to gain release from suffering. The second are those who study and practice to brag about their accomplishments and to pass their days in argument, believing that memorizing a lot of texts or being able to quote a lot of teachers is a sign of their importance. Many times, when people of this second sort came to see Longpu, instead of asking his advice on how to practice, they would spray out their knowledge and ideas for him to hear in great detail. Still, he was always able to sit and listen to them. In fact, when they had finished, he would add one more comment to theirs. Those who are obsessed with scriptures and teachers won't be able to gain release from suffering. But still, those who want to gain release from suffering do have to depend on scriptures and teachers. When people asked Longpu about death and rebirth, or about past and future lives, he was never interested in answering. Or if some people argued that they didn't believe that heaven and hell really existed, he never tried to reason with them or to cite evidence to defeat their arguments. Instead, he'd give them this piece of advice. People who practice the Dhamma don't have to give any thought to past or future lives, or to heaven or hell. All they have to do is be firm and intent on practicing correctly in line with the principles of virtue, concentration, and discernment. If there really are 16 levels of heaven, as they say in the texts, people who practice well are sure to rise to those levels. Or if heaven and Nibbana don't exist, people who practice well don't lack for benefits here and now. They're sure to be happy as human beings on a high level. Listening to what other people say, looking things up in the texts, can't resolve your doubts. You have to put effort into the practice to give rise to clear insight knowledge. That's when doubt will be totally resolved on its own. Even though people would come in groups to hear Longpu's opinion about rebirth, claiming that this person or that was able to remember many past lives, seeing that they had been in the past or who their mothers or relatives in past lives had been, Longpu would say, "I've never been interested in this sort of knowledge. Even just threshold concentration can give rise to it. Everything comes from the mind. Whatever you want to know or see, the mind will grant you the knowledge or vision, and quickly at that. If you're satisfied with just this level of knowledge, the good result is that you'll fear being reborn on a low level. That way you'll set your mind on doing good, being generous, observing the precepts, and not harming one another. You'll be able to smile, confident in the results of your merit. But as for eliminating defilement to destroy ignorance, craving, and attachment, in order to reach total release from suffering, that's something else entirely. Long Pu was severely ill at the Waddleon Khan hospital. On the night of the 17th day of his stay, he was very fatigued, to the point where doctors had to give him an oxygen tube. Late that night, after midnight, a famous monk, together with a large following, came to pay respects. Seeing that this was a special occasion, I let them into Long Pu's room. Long Pu lay on his right side with his eyes closed throughout the visit. When the monk and his following had bowed down to him, the monk leaned over to him and spoke directly into his ear. Long Pu, do you still have any feelings of pain? Long Pu answered, feeling and body still exist in line with their nature, but I don't partake of that feeling at all. On January 20th, 1973, just before Long Pu was to leave Waddleon Khan Hospital, his students decided to donate a Sangha dana to dedicate the merit to the past generations who had built the hospital and had since passed on. When the ceremony was over, a number of doctors and nurses came to pay their respects to Long Pu and to express their happiness that he had recovered. They commented in a friendly way, "Your health is still good and strong. Your face is bright, as if you hadn't been sick at all. This is probably the fruit of your good powers of concentration. We don't have much spare time to practice concentration. Are there any methods that are simple or quick?" Long Pu responded, "Whenever you have time, use that time to practice. Training the mind, examining the mind, is the quickest, most direct method of all." Once a senior meditation teacher came to discuss many high-level topics of Dhamma with Long Pu and ended with a question. Some of the senior meditation monks conduct themselves well and inspire great respect. Even other monks agree that they're firmly established in the Buddhist teachings. But then something happens. Either they disrobe or their behavior starts going astray, running afoul of the Dhamma and Vinaya. So what level of Dhamma does one have to reach in order to cut transmigration for sure, so that there's no more becoming in birth? Long Pu said, "Being strictly restrained in line with the Vinaya and observing the ascetic disciplines is an admirable form of conduct that's extremely inspiring. But if you haven't developed the mind to the level of heightened mind and heightened discernment, it can always regress, for it hasn't yet reached the transcendent. Actually, arahants don't need to know much. They simply have to develop their minds to be clear about the five aggregates and to penetrate dependent co-arising, paticca samuppada. That's when they can stop fabricating, stop searching, stop all motions of the mind. Right there is where everything ends. All that remains is pure, clean, bright, great emptiness, enormously empty." These are quotes directly from Long Pu as well. "The desire to know and see, so as to put an end to one's doubts, is something you find in all advanced people. Every science, every branch of learning has been established so that people will question and want to know. That's when they'll make the effort to study and practice to reach the goal of that branch of learning. But in the area of the Buddhist teachings, you have to study and practice in a balanced way, and your effort has to be intense so that you can enter into the highest thing in the Dhamma on your own. That's when you'll end your doubts totally on your own. It's like a person from the countryside who's never seen Bangkok. When people tell him that, in addition to being developed in other ways, Bangkok has a jeweled wall, the name of the fortress wall around the Grand Palace, and an enormous gold mountain, the name of the Chetia at Wat Saket. He makes up his mind to go to Bangkok with the expectation that he'll be able to get some jewels from the wall and some gold from the mountain. But when he finally makes it to Bangkok and someone shows him, that's the jeweled wall, that's the gold mountain, that puts an immediate end to all his questions and expectations. The path, fruitions, and Nibbana are like that. I remember that in 1976, two meditation teachers from the northern part of the Northeast came to pay their respects to Luang Pu. The way they discussed the practice with him was very delightful and inspiring. They described the virtues and attainments of the different Ajaans with whom they had lived and practiced for a long time, saying that Luang Pu had concentration as his constant mental dwelling. This Ajaan dwelled in the Brahma attitudes, which is why so many people respected him. That Luang Pu dwelled in the limitless Brahma attitudes, which is why there was no limit to the number of students he had and why he was always safe from dangers. Luang Pu said, "Whatever level a monk has reached, as far as I'm concerned, he's welcome to dwell there. As for me, I dwell with knowing." When those two monks heard Luang Pu say that, he dwelled with knowing, they were silent for a moment, and then asked him to explain what dwelling with knowing was like. Luang Pu explained, "Knowing is the normalcy of mind that's empty, bright, pure, that has stopped fabricating, stopped searching, stopped all mental motions, having nothing, not attached to anything at all." Final words. A few moments after we had finished chanting the Mahasatipatthana discourse, Luang Pu began speaking about the Lord Buddha's total Nibbana, from the beginning to the end. Here I'll ask just to quote his concluding remarks. The Lord Buddha didn't attain Nibbana in any of his jhanic attainments. When he left the fourth jhana, his mental aggregates all ceased at once, with nothing remaining. In other words, he allowed his feeling aggregate to cease in an awake state of mind. The normal human mental series, complete with mindfulness and alertness, with no other mental states coming to blind or delude the mind at all. This was the mind fully in its own state. You could call that state great emptiness, or the original cosmos, or Nibbana, whatever you like. That's the state I've been practicing all along to reach. Those were Luang Pu's last words. Luang Pu, having had the chance to pay respect to what we're doing several times, would you be willing to share any?
Well, one of the things that stood out was just how humble he was. And you can tell by his teachings how direct and how kind of grounded he was, but there was a tremendous humility and kind of softness about him. I mean, he wasn't and he was completely at ease and at peace with things around him. And I met him both at Wat Nanachat as well as at his monastery. And he just seemed just very peaceful, very spacious, very caring. So there's a humility, but everything was quite measured about him in the sense of he wasn't It was very contained, or not in a like trying to hold it together kind of contained, but a contained in the sense of there wasn't anything moving out. It was everything was just settled. So that was extremely inspiring to see, and it's even more inspiring to see when you go to his monastery, because it was, I mean, it was a forest monastery, but then, and it used to be just outside the, in those days it was probably, it was a market town, but it was just a small place, Surian, pretty small backwater. But then, it's a provincial capital, it grew up, and then the area around his monastery is where they ended up setting up the provincial offices and almost like the town square, like the municipal grounds. So then everything developed out to that area. So it ended up being pretty busy, pretty noisy, but he was never ever kind of moved, and it was that was very inspiring. He was very just very grounded, very anchored. But he was also, he wasn't aloof. He was just very, very caring and present, clear. So he was quite very inspiring monk. And he really was one of the early disciples of Ajaan Mun, very early. He died when he was, 96, 97, something like that, well into his 90s. And that was, when would that have been? That would have been probably in the late 80s. So he was born in the late 1800s, I assume. I can't remember, but so he was practicing with Ajaan Mun as himself as a young monk, and so that was the very early days of Ajaan Mun's teaching career that he was able to plug in, and he was always looked on as a exemplary student or exemplary teacher.
In the biography of Lumpur Chab, I can't remember who the other monk was, but they described Lumpur Chab and another monk as being this sort of Moggallana and Sariputta to Lumpur Mun. I can't remember if it was Lumpur Dune, Lumpur Cow. Does anyone jump out at you?
I can't remember that. Yeah, I can't remember that.
It's one of that early group.
But yeah, hard to know. Because also, because even like his own, there was a simplicity to Lumpur Dune in his, everything coming back to the knowing. So as opposed to, say, like some of the, Tanpali was very accomplished in various psychic powers and whatnot, or say Ajahn Fun was an incredible teacher, and so that, and in terms of explicating the Dhamma, then there were others who were probably way more articulate than Lumpur Dune, but he was very spare in his in his words. It's hard to get him to actually give a whole talk. He'd be content with just some short instruction, and you got to go and do it yourself.